In a hotel built for the rich, Adaora moved like a shadow, cleaning, scrubbing, disappearing, until one mistake forced the most powerful man in the building to finally see her. Before we go on, kindly like this video, subscribe if you love inspiring and emotional stories, and tell me your country in the comments. Now sit back, grab your popcorn, get cozy, and let's step into Adaora's story. Adaora Okafor was tired in a way that had gone beyond ordinary tiredness. Not the kind sleep could fix in one night. Not the kind a plate of food and a quiet evening could soften. This one had settled inside her bones. It sat behind her eyes, dragged at her shoulders, and made every step feel like she was carrying a bag of stones no one else could see. For 6 days she had worked morning shift and night shift almost back to back. At first, it had been because of Ifunanya, one of the other cleaners, who had come with a sad face and a soft voice, saying her aunt was sick. The next day, it was her younger brother. The day after that, transport trouble, then stomach pain, then church program, then family emergency again. There was always something. Always one more excuse. Always one more reason Adaora should please help just this once. Adaora had said yes too many times. Now the price of that kindness was sitting heavily on her body. She had not slept well in days. She had not eaten enough either. That afternoon, all she had managed was half a meat pie and water from the staff cooler before someone called her to another floor. Since then, she had been moving from room to room with a mop in one hand and a cleaning spray in the other, her mind dull, her legs weak, her mouth dry. By the time she reached the final room on her list, she almost wanted to laugh. The VIP suite. Of course. The richest room in the hotel had waited for her at the end like a final punishment. She pushed the trolley in quietly, closed the door behind her, and stood still for a second, gathering strength. The suite looked like a place where people did not know what tiredness meant. Soft lighting, thick carpet, a sitting area bigger than the room she rented, fresh flowers, glass tables that reflected warm golden light. Everything smelled expensive. Adaora swallowed and moved forward. "Just finish this one," she whispered to herself, "just this one and go home." Her voice sounded weak in the silence. She started with the bedroom area, straightening what needed to be straightened, wiping surfaces, collecting used towels, replacing toiletries, making the bed neat again. Her hands moved from habit. Her body no longer needed instruction. It only obeyed routine. Then she stepped into the bathroom. She stopped. The bathroom was so large that for one strange moment she thought she had entered another room by mistake. There was polished marble everywhere, 2 sinks, a large glass shower, a bathtub wide enough for a small child to float inside comfortably, bright mirrors, chrome fittings shining under the light, clean white towels folded like decoration. It was not a bathroom, it was a world of its own. Adaora let out a tired breath and muttered, "This bathroom is bigger than my whole room." No one heard her, but the bitter truth of it stayed in the air. She shook her head and got to work. She poured disinfectant into one sink and began scrubbing, her hand moving in slow circles. She wiped the countertop, cleaned the mirror, rinsed the sink again. She moved to the second one, then the toilet, then the shower area. By the time she reached the bathtub, her arms felt heavy, very heavy. She bent down to clean the tiled edge around it and paused, pressing one palm briefly against the side of the tub. Just 5 seconds, that was all. Just enough to rest her back, just enough to breathe, just enough to stop the room from spinning. Her eyelids lowered. She forced them open again. "No," she whispered to herself, "not here." But her body was no longer listening. She shifted, intending only to sit for one moment on the closed toilet lid before getting up to finish the rest. That one moment swallowed her whole. Her head leaned to one side, her fingers loosened around the cloth in her hand. The noise in her mind faded, and Adaora slept, still in her uniform, still surrounded by spray bottles, folded cloths, and a half-emptied bucket by the sink. Outside, time moved on. At the other end of the hotel, Obinna Scott Okeke stepped out of a long meeting with the kind of controlled expression that fooled most people into thinking he was never affected by stress. He was. He simply did not wear it loosely. He had spent the entire day in meetings with investors, partners, and department heads. Numbers, delays, complaints, new contracts, old problems, faces that smiled too much and said too little. By the time he entered the private lift that led to his suite, he wanted silence more than anything. No calls, no interruptions, no human drama. Just a shower, a quiet room, and perhaps a few minutes before the next battle waiting for him in the morning. He loosened his tie as he walked into the suite, already mentally leaving the day behind. He dropped a folder onto the table in the sitting area, unbuttoned the top of his shirt, and headed straight for the bathroom without really looking around. He pushed the door open, then froze. For one sharp second, his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. A woman. In a hotel cleaner's uniform, sleeping on the toilet lid, Obinna jumped back as if he had almost stepped on something alive. What on earth? His voice rang through the bathroom with enough force to wake the dead. Adaora jerked awake in pure panic. She did not even understand where she was before her body moved in fear. She sprang up too fast, lost her balance immediately, and slipped sideways. Her arm hit the cleaning bucket. It toppled over with a loud clatter, spilling dirty water across the tiled floor. Oh God! She landed badly on one knee, eyes wide, breath trapped in her throat. Obinna stared at her. She stared back. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and visibly annoyed, his shirt partly unbuttoned, his face hard with shock. Even in that moment of confusion, Adaora could tell exactly who he was. Not just a guest, the owner, the man whose name every staff member lowered their voice to say. Her blood turned cold. Obinna recovered first. "Who are you?" he demanded, "and what are you doing in my bathroom?" Adaora's mouth opened before her mind caught up. "I did not steal anything." The words flew out of her in a rush. Obinna blinked. For a second, he looked almost offended by the direction her panic had taken. "What? I swear, sir, I did not touch anything," she said quickly, struggling to stand. "I was cleaning. I was just cleaning." He stared at her as if he was not sure whether to be angry or confused. "You were cleaning," he repeated slowly, "and somehow that led to you sleeping on the toilet?" Adaora's face burned with shame. It was not like that. He looked around the bathroom, then back at her, one eyebrow lifting. "It looks exactly like that." She opened her mouth, closed it, and tried again. "I only sat down for a moment. I did not mean to sleep. I have been working since morning. My body just—" She swallowed and looked down. "It just stopped." Obinna folded his arms. "So this is how you clean rooms now? You sleep in guest bathrooms and hope nobody notices?" His tone was dry, almost too calm, and that somehow made the embarrassment worse. Adaora shook her head quickly. "No, sir, never. It has never happened before." He looked at the fallen bucket, the water spreading across the floor, then at the cloth still hanging from her hand. "How long were you sleeping?" 5 minutes, she said immediately. His expression changed just slightly. "You counted?" She looked miserable. It could not have been long. He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he exhaled through his nose and studied her properly for the first time. She looked exhausted, not pretending, not careless, not lazy, exhausted. Her eyes were dull with lack of sleep, her face was pale beneath her brown skin, her uniform was neat but worn. Even the way she stood told its own story, like her body was still trying to recover from being dragged out of deep sleep by fear. Something in his irritation shifted, not disappeared, shifted. Adaora noticed the silence and rushed to fill it. "I am sorry, sir. I know this is wrong. I know how it looks. I have been covering extra shifts, and I have not really slept, and I know that is not an excuse. But I was cleaning, and then I sat down only to rest my back, and—" She stopped because her chest was tightening, and words were beginning to trip over one another. Obinna watched her for another moment. Then, without saying anything, he turned and walked out of the bathroom. Adaora stared after him in disbelief. Was he calling security? Was he going to report her to management? Was this the exact moment her job ended? Her legs felt unsteady, but she followed him. Anyway, he had moved into the sitting area and was standing near a coffee tray that had been left earlier. He picked up a cup, poured from the flask into it, and held it out toward her. Adaora stopped a few steps away, confused. He looked at her. "Do you drink coffee?" She blinked. Of all the things she expected him to say, that was not one of them. "Yes, sir," she answered carefully. "Come here." Still unsure, she stepped closer. He handed her the cup. "Smell it." She stared at him. "Sir?" "Smell the coffee." Adaora glanced at his face to see if this was some strange test, but his expression gave nothing away. Slowly she lifted the cup and brought it near her nose. The smell hit her at once. Her nose wrinkled before she could stop it. "This is bad." The answer came out naturally, almost before she realized she had spoken. Something flickered in Obinna's eyes. He took one small step forward. "Bad how?" Adaora looked up, startled by the sharpness of his attention. She hesitated. Then she smelled it again. "The beans are too roasted," she said quietly. "Not just strong, burnt." He said nothing. She frowned and continued, now listening more closely to what her senses were already telling her. "It smells bitter in a harsh way. Not rich, not deep, just burnt. And—" she paused, searching for the right words. "It feels like somebody tried to force it into tasting expensive, but it lost balance on the way." Obinna's face grew still. Adaora lowered the cup, suddenly aware of herself again. "I am sorry. Maybe I should not have said it like that." "How do you know?" he asked. She looked confused. "Know what?" "That it is bad. You have not even tasted it." Adaora glanced at the cup again. "You do not always need to taste first." He said nothing, so she continued softly. "When coffee is good, it carries something full and warm. This one smells dry, bitter. The roast is too much. It is trying too hard. You can almost feel the burnt edge before drinking it." Silence followed, not empty silence. Thinking silence. For the first time since she had seen him, Obinna was no longer looking at her, like an inconvenience he had discovered in his bathroom. He was looking at her like he had noticed something unexpected and could not yet decide what it meant. Adaora shifted under the weight of his gaze. "Sir," she said carefully, "am I fired?" He did not answer at once. Instead, he took the cup from her hand and looked down into it as though the coffee had just become part of a larger question. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "I have not decided." Her stomach dropped. "Not decided? What kind of answer was that?" She opened her mouth, but before she could say anything else, Obinna set the cup down and looked at her again. "This hotel has a problem," he said. Adaora frowned slightly, unsure where this was going. "The food and beverage department has been underperforming for months. The complaints are subtle, but they are there. The coffee is bad, breakfast is inconsistent, things that should be excellent are only average." Adaora just stared at him. He continued, his tone direct. Almost businesslike again, but there was something else underneath it now. Interest. "You are going to help me fix it." For one full second, Adaora thought she had heard wrongly. Then she blinked. "Sir?" Obinna's eyes remained on hers. "You heard me." Her mouth fell open a little. She forgot her fear for a moment because confusion rushed in and pushed everything else aside. She looked like a woman who had expected dismissal and somehow found herself standing at the edge of something she could not yet understand. And Obinna, still tired from his day, still annoyed by the absurdity of the situation, still not sure exactly why he was doing this, realized one simple thing. The cleaner who had fallen asleep in his bathroom was not ordinary. And whatever gift was hiding inside her, he intended to find out exactly how far it could go. Adaora stared at Obinna as if he had suddenly started speaking a language she did not understand. "You are joking," she said at last. "I am not." His face did not change, no smile, no sign that he was trying to confuse her for his own amusement. Adaora gave a short, nervous laugh. "Sir, with respect, I clean rooms. I do not know anything about food." Obinna leaned one hand against the table and looked at her steadily. "A few minutes ago you told me what was wrong with that coffee without tasting it. That is different." "How?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was different in her mind, but now that he had asked, she could not explain why. She had only said what she sensed. It had not felt important until he started looking at her like that. Obinna straightened. "If I wanted to fire you, Adaora, you would already be gone." The way he said it left no room for argument. She swallowed. "I am not trying to punish you," he continued. "I am trying to understand something. The hotel's coffee is bad. Some of the food has been getting lazy. Guests may not always complain loudly, but they notice. And if you can smell what is wrong in a cup, maybe you can also tell what is wrong on a plate." Adaora still looked doubtful. "Sir, I am not a chef." I am not trained." And yet you knew. She looked down at her hands. It would have been easier if he had shouted at her, called security, and ended the matter. This was worse. This was strange. This was a door opening where she had expected a wall. Obinna turned toward the door. Come with me. To where? The restaurant. At that hour, the restaurant was quieter than usual. A few late guests sat at distant tables. The lights were low and soft, and the air carried the warm smell of food that would have made Adaora hungry if she had allowed herself to feel it. Obinna spoke briefly to a staff member on duty. Within minutes, several dishes were brought out and placed before them. Adaora stopped in front of the table, uncertain. He pulled out a chair. Sit. She sat slowly. The plates in front of her looked too fine for somebody like her to touch casually. The kind of food served in polished dishes, with decoration at the edge, like each plate had been arranged for a photograph. Obinna sat across from her. Well, he said. Adaora looked from the plates to his face. You want me to taste all this? Yes. She hesitated. He noticed it immediately. What? Nothing. His eyes rested on her for a moment longer than was comfortable, then dropped briefly to the way her fingers tightened near the edge of the table. When did you last eat? The question caught her off guard. She tried to answer quickly, but nothing came out at first. Then she said, I ate. What did you eat? Adaora looked away. It does not matter. It matters if I am asking. Her cheeks grew warm. Half meat pie. And before that? She said nothing. Obinna leaned back slightly, studying her face. Then his voice became quieter. Eat first. She blinked. Sir? You heard me. Eat. Adaora looked at the food again. She had spent too much of her life learning not to look hungry in front of people. Hunger was private. Need was private. Shame was private. But the smell of the dishes rising toward her now made her stomach tighten painfully. She picked up the fork. The first thing she tasted was a plated chicken dish with sauce spread around it in a careful circle. She chewed once, twice, and frowned. Obinna watched closely. What is wrong with it? Adaora swallowed. The sauce has too much oil. He did not interrupt. She took another small bite and shook her head. It is trying to be rich, but the oil is sitting on top instead of blending into the flavor. You taste grease before you taste the food. Obinna's eyes narrowed with interest. She moved to the meat on another plate. The first chew was enough. This one is overcooked. How can you tell that so fast? She held up the piece slightly with the fork. It is dry already. Even before swallowing, you can feel it fighting your mouth. He said nothing, but something in his face shifted again. Adaora tasted another dish, then paused longer. This one does not know what it wants to be. Obinna's mouth almost twitched. Explain. The flavors are arguing. She frowned, trying to put the feeling into words. One side wants to be sweet, another side wants to be spicy. Then something sour enters the middle for no reason. Nothing is leading. Everything is just pushing. For the first time, he smiled a little. Adaora looked at him and instantly became self-conscious. Maybe I am saying it badly. No, he said, you are not. She tasted one more plate and set down her fork. Poor balance. In what way? The food is not one thing. It does not land anywhere. You finish chewing and nothing stays with you except confusion. The silence between them was different now. Not awkward, not hostile, measured. Obinna looked at the untouched parts of the dishes, then back at her. You noticed all that just by tasting once. Adaora gave a small shrug, uncomfortable under praise. Maybe anybody could. No. She looked up. No, he repeated, anybody could not. For a second, she did not know what to do with that answer. He reached for one of the plates and tasted it himself, as if checking her judgment against his own. Then he tasted the meat, then the sauce. His expression hardened, not at her, but at the truth of what she had said. He set the fork down. You are coming to the kitchen tomorrow morning. Adaora nearly choked on the water she had just taken. Sir? The breakfast service starts early. Be there. I cannot just enter the kitchen and start telling chefs what is wrong with their food. Why not? Because they will chase me out. If they do, they will answer to me. She stared at him again. This is too much, she said softly. It was just coffee, Just one dinner. It does not mean anything. Obinna's gaze sharpened. Stop doing that, she frowned. Doing what? Making yourself smaller so that what you have will not scare you. Adaora was silent. He stood up. Report to the kitchen tomorrow morning. Then he looked at her properly again, not like a cleaner, not like a mistake, but like something he had no intention of overlooking. And get some sleep, he added. That night, Adaora got home much later than usual. Home was a small rented room at the back of a compound where the corridor light did not always work, and the tap outside had to be shared with too many people. Her mattress lay on a low bed frame by the wall. One plastic chair sat in the corner beside a small table carrying a kettle, a cup, and a tin of milk, with almost nothing left inside it. Normally the room felt too small. That night, after the size of the VIP bathroom, it felt even smaller. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without removing her shoes. Then she lay down still in her clothes and stared at the ceiling. The whole day replayed in strange pieces. The bathroom, his shout, the spilled bucket, the coffee, the plates. The way he had said, "Stop doing that." She turned to one side and shut her eyes, then opened them again. Sleep came late and badly. By the time dawn arrived, her body still felt heavy. She washed quickly, tied her hair back neatly, wore her uniform, and walked to the hotel with the nervous feeling of someone going to face judgment. The kitchen was already alive when she entered. Voices crossed over one another, pots clanged, trays moved, knives hit chopping boards with fast, practiced rhythm, steam rose from one side of the room, the air smelled of eggs, butter, bread, tea, and pressure. And standing near the middle of it, in a clean chef's jacket, with his hands behind his back, was a broad-shouldered man with a face that suggested he was not in the mood for nonsense. Obinna stood beside him. When Adaora entered, both men turned. Obinna glanced at his wristwatch. "You are late." Adaora almost laughed from stress. "If you want to fire me, sir, it may be easier to do it now." Obinna's mouth moved slightly. "You say that too often." The chef looked her up and down with open disbelief. "This is her?" he asked. "Yes," Obinna said. The chef turned fully toward Adaora. "The cleaner." Adaora wished the floor would open. Obinna, however, looked completely unbothered. "Her name is Adaora." The chef nodded once, though there was no warmth in it. "Chef Emeka Nwankwo," Adaora greeted him quietly. He barely answered before looking back at Obinna. "With respect, sir, I still do not understand why she is here." Obinna's voice stayed calm. "Because the breakfast has been failing." A shadow crossed Chef Emeka's face. "My team is trained," he said. "We know what we are doing." Obinna looked at the spread prepared for tasting. "Then perhaps you can explain why the standard has been dropping." The chef's jaw tightened. "You cannot be serious," he said. "You brought housekeeping staff into my kitchen to judge my work." Obinna met his eyes without blinking. "If your kitchen was doing the work it is meant to do, there would be no reason for her to be here." The words dropped heavily between them. Adaora wanted to disappear. Chef Emeka folded his arms. "Fine. Since she is here, let us hear what your cleaner has to say." The challenge in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Obinna turned to Adaora. "Taste." Adaora looked at the dishes laid out on the side table. Breakfast items, scrambled eggs, bread, butter, juice, small sausages, tea cakes, a few extras prepared for presentation. Every eye near enough to notice had quietly shifted toward her. She picked up a fork with fingers that did not feel steady. The first taste was the scrambled eggs. Her face changed before she could hide it. Chef Emeka noticed. "What?" Adaora swallowed. "They are dry." He stared. "Dry?" "Yes." She took another small bite and spoke more carefully. "They should feel soft, but they are already breaking apart, and the butter used here," she frowned, "it is poor." A few kitchen staff exchanged glances. Chef Emeka's expression hardened. "Poor in what sense?" "It has no depth. It melts, but it leaves nothing behind. It tastes cheap." Silence. Obinna said nothing. That was worse than if he had spoken. Adaora reached for the bread next. One bite and she knew. "This bread is not fresh." Chef Emeka gave a short, humorless laugh. "You can tell that too. It was baked earlier than it should have been, or stored badly." She looked at it again. "It is not dead yet, but it is no longer alive either. One of the younger kitchen assistants looked down quickly as if hiding a reaction. Then Adaora lifted the small glass of juice. She took one sip and nearly winced. This should not be served, Chef Emeka's voice sharpened. Why? Because it tastes confused. Obinna spoke for the first time. Explain. Adaora lowered the glass. It is trying to pass as fresh juice, but it is mixed badly with packaged juice. The two are fighting each other. One tastes flat, the other tastes sharp. Together they taste dishonest. Nobody spoke. The kitchen noise around them suddenly felt farther away. Chef Emeka looked at Obinna, then at Adaora, then back again. His pride was under attack, and everyone there knew it. Adaora wished the tasting would end, but now that she had begun, something inside her would not let her lie. She looked across the breakfast spread once more and said quietly, "The ingredient standard is weak." Chef Emeka let out a breath through his nose. Meaning? Meaning the food is built on things that are not good enough. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke. A strong kitchen can still make mistakes sometimes, but this tastes like too many corners are being cut before the cooking even begins. That one landed hard. Chef Emeka's face darkened. Obinna, on the other hand, looked almost pleased. Adaora should have stopped there. Instead, perhaps because she was already standing in trouble, she said the truth exactly as she felt it. "This is a 5-star hotel," she said, "but this breakfast tastes like something from far below that." The words hung in the air like a slap. Nobody moved. Then Chef Emeka spoke in a dangerously quiet voice. "And what would you suggest, since you suddenly know so much?" Adaora's heartbeat quickened, but Obinna's eyes were on her, calm and expectant, and something about that steadied her. She drew a breath. "Better ingredients," she said. "Real butter, fresh bread every morning, eggs that are not pushed too far, juice that is either fresh or honestly packaged, not pretending to be both. If the base is weak, no amount of plating will save it." Chef Emeka looked like he might explode. Adaora kept going because she had already gone too far to soften it now. "Guests may not complain every day," she said, "but they know when food is lazy, and once they begin to expect disappointment, they stop trusting the hotel." That was the final blow. Obinna nodded once. "Good." Chef Emeka turned toward him. "Sir." "No," Obinna said calmly. "She is right." The chef's mouth shut. Obinna looked over the breakfast items again, then at Chef Emeka. "We make changes from today." Chef Emeka stood still, insult written all over him. But even he had no answer ready, because the shameful part was this. She was right. When Adaora finally stepped out of the kitchen, her knees felt weak. She walked down the corridor almost in a daze. She had expected to be thrown out. Instead, she had stood in front of the head chef and spoken like somebody whose opinion mattered. The thought frightened her. It also warmed something deep inside her that had been cold for a very long time. For the first time in years, Adaora felt like she had done something important. By mid-morning, the whole hotel seemed to know. News moved faster in places where people had little else to own besides information. By the time Adaora got to the laundry room to continue her normal shift, the whispers had already formed shape. Chioma Eze came rushing in with the excitement of someone carrying hot gist in both hands. "Adaora!" Adaora looked up from the bedsheets she was folding. "What now?" Chioma grabbed her arm. "Tell me it is not true." Adaora's face dropped. "Which one?" "They are saying you stood in the kitchen and embarrassed Chef Emeka in front of Oga himself." Adaora let out a tired breath. "I did not embarrass anybody." Chioma's eyes widened. "So it is true. I only answered what they asked me." Chioma stared at her as if she had discovered a hidden twin. "You, in that kitchen, in front of Chef Emeka?" Adaora bent back over the sheets. "Please do not make noise." But Chioma was too excited to lower her voice. "Do you know what people are saying?" Adaora already knew she would not like the answer. Chioma leaned closer anyway. "They are saying no cleaner can rise this fast unless she is doing something with the boss." Adaora froze. For 1 second, all the warmth from earlier drained out of her body. Chioma saw her expression and softened a little. "You know how people are." Adaora laughed once, but there was no joy in it. "Yes, I know." The words spread worse as the day went on. By afternoon, the story had changed shape again. Some said she had cried in Obinna's room and he felt sorry for her. Some said he had caught her there for a reason nobody respectable would explain. Some said no man as powerful as Obinna Scott Okiki would look twice at an ordinary cleaner unless there was something else behind it. Adaora tried to keep her head down, tried to focus on work, tried not to let each whisper enter her skin, but by the time the laundry room door opened again, her heart had grown tired. She looked up, expecting another stare or another sly smile. Instead, she saw Chef Emeka. She straightened at once. Kioma nearly dropped the towel she was holding. The chef stepped inside with none of the arrogance he had worn that morning. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "Adaora," he said. She waited. He cleared his throat. "I came to speak with you." Kioma slowly moved backward, pretending to busy herself while still listening with both ears. Chef Emeka glanced down briefly, then back up. "We made the changes." Adaora blinked. "Sir?" "The breakfast." He seemed to force the words out. "We changed some ingredients, adjusted a few things. Guests noticed." She just stared. He gave a short nod. The feedback was good. Kioma's mouth fell open. Adaora did not know what to say. Chef Emeka took a breath. "I was harsh this morning." That was the nearest he could come to an apology, and all of them knew it. Then, after another pause, he added, "You were right." The room went quiet. Adaora felt almost more shocked by those words than she had felt in Obinna's bathroom the night before. Chef Emeka shifted his weight. "When we test new dishes, I would like your opinion." Kioma made a choking sound that she turned into a fake cough. Adaora looked from the chef's face to the floor and back again. "My opinion?" "Yes." The answer was reluctant, but real. She nodded slowly. "If I can help." Chef Emeka gave one stiff nod in return. "Good." Then he turned and left the room. The door shut behind him. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Kioma grabbed Adaora's shoulders. "What is happening in your life?" Adaora almost laughed, almost cried. "I do not know," she said truthfully. And that was the strange part. She really did not know. But she knew one thing clearly now. Something had shifted. People might still look down on her. They might gossip, laugh, and twist her story into something ugly. But a door had opened, and for the first time in her life, somebody on the other side had said, "Come in." The peace did not last long. The next day, the whispers grew sharper. Adaora was pushing her cleaning trolley down the hallway when Amaka Nwosu from reception stopped her with a smile that was too sweet to be kind. "So it is true," Amaka said. Adaora kept her hand on the trolley handle. "What is true?" Amaka tilted her head. "That you have become very important." Adaora's chest tightened. "I am doing my work." Amaka's smile widened. "People do not move from cleaner to kitchen advisor overnight for nothing." Adaora looked at her tiredly. "What are you trying to say?" Amaka leaned closer. "I am saying nobody rises that fast without doing something special for the right person." The insult slid in smoothly, as if wrapped in perfume. Adaora's face went hot. "It is not like that." Amaka lifted both brows. "Then what is it like?" Adaora opened her mouth, but suddenly she was too tired to defend herself again. Too tired to explain something people had already chosen not to understand. She gripped the trolley tighter and said, "Excuse me." Amaka stepped aside with a little laugh. "Of course, big people do not have time." Adaora walked away without looking back. Her eyes burned, but she forced herself to keep moving. She was still carrying that heaviness inside her when a message reached her through one of the floor supervisors. "The CEO wants to see you." Her heart dropped, again. This time, when she entered his office, she was more guarded. Obinna sat behind his desk with a file open in front of him. He looked up as she entered. "Sit." Adaora sat carefully. He studied her for a brief moment, as if he could see the strain she was carrying. Then he said, "There is a major international food event coming up." Adaora blinked. "Sir? I will be attending. I want you to come with me." For a second, the room seemed to go still around her. She stared at him so long that any other man might have looked away. Obinna did not. "Come with you where?" she asked. "To the event." "And do what?" "Help me evaluate what we see. Food, chefs, ideas, products, talent." Adaora let out a small breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Sir, no. No? No. She shook her head quickly. This one is too much. I am a cleaner. I should not even have been in the kitchen yesterday. Now you are talking about taking me to some international event. You have ability. I have opinion, she corrected. You have more than opinion. She looked down. You are mistaken. Obinna's expression changed, not softer, firmer. Why do you keep doing that? She looked up carefully. Doing what? Refusing to stand inside what is already obvious. Her throat tightened. He went on, I do not care about titles, Adaora. I care about results. You can hear what others do not hear. Taste what others miss. That matters. She gave a weak shake of the head. People like me do not go to places like that. Why not? Because people like me clean up after people who go there, she wanted to say. Because people like me are not invited anywhere except by mistake. Because one wrong move in a room full of polished people can stay in your mind for years. But all she said was, I will not fit there. That is not your decision to make before you even try. She was quiet. Obinna opened a drawer, pulled out a document, and placed it on the table. I am not asking for charity. I am offering work. You will be paid. Adaora stared at the paper without touching it. Think about it, he said. She rose slowly when the conversation ended and left his office carrying more confusion than when she entered. The rest of the day passed around her like a blur. She cleaned, answered greetings she barely heard, avoided fresh whispers, ignored Kioma's questions because she did not yet know how to explain what had happened. By evening she was back in her room, seated on the edge of her bed in the half-light. The noise of the compound drifted in from outside. Someone was laughing near the tap. A radio played faintly from another room. A child cried and was hushed. Adaora sat very still. The hotel uniform she had changed out of hung from a nail on the wall. Her small bag lay beside her. The room looked like it always did. Simple, tight, familiar. Yet inside her something was moving. She thought of the way Obinna had looked at her from across the table in the restaurant, not with pity, not with amusement, with certainty. She thought of the kitchen, of Chef Emeka returning to apologize, of hearing perhaps for the first time in her life that what she noticed had value. She thought of all the years behind her, all the times she had been useful but unseen, all the times she had been told, directly or indirectly, that her place was small and should remain small. No one had ever looked at her and said, "You have a gift." No one. She pressed both hands together tightly. What if he was wrong? What if she went and failed? What if the whole thing became a bigger shame than she could bear? But underneath all that fear was another truth, smaller but stronger. What if he was right? Her phone lay beside her on the bed. She picked it up, put it down, picked it up again. Her heart beat faster as she opened his number. For a full minute she stared at the empty message line. Then, before fear could talk her out of it, she typed, "I will go." She read it once. Her thumb hovered. Then she pressed send. The message left her phone. Adaora stared at the screen after it was gone, as if she might still catch it and pull it back. But it was done. In the quiet of her small room, with her heart beating hard and her future suddenly feeling much larger than she was ready for, Adaora realized she had just said yes to something that might change everything. The reply came less than a minute later. Good. Be ready by Friday morning. Adaora stared at the message for a long time. No extra words, no explanation. Just the kind of short message only a man like Obinna Scott Okeke would send. As if inviting a cleaner to travel with him for an international food event was the simplest thing in the world. Her stomach turned. Friday morning. It was real now. For the next 2 days, Adaora moved through work like someone carrying a secret under her skin. She still cleaned rooms, she still folded sheets, pushed her trolley, answered supervisors, and avoided unkind eyes in the corridor. But inside her something had changed. Fear had changed shape. Before it was fear of being laughed at. No, it was that, and something else. Hope. That frightened her even more. By the morning of the trip, her hands were already cold before sunrise. She stood in her small room, looking at the few clothes spread across her bed, and felt close to panic. Nothing she owned looked like something a person should wear while traveling beside a billionaire. There was a knock at her door. Before she answered, Chioma Eza pushed it open and entered with a small bag in her hand and energy in her steps. Chioma was one of the few people in the hotel who had cared about Adaora before anything strange began happening. She worked in the laundry section, talked too much, laughed too loudly, and had the kind of heart that liked to wrap concern inside teasing. "I knew it," Chioma said, looking Adaora over. "You are standing there like somebody going to write final exam." Adaora gave a weak smile. "Maybe I am." Chioma dropped the bag on the bed and opened it. "Move. I brought 2 dresses, 1 blouse, 1 soft trouser, and 1 pair of shoes. They are not new, but they look better than the things you were planning to wear." Adaora looked at her. "You brought all this for me?" Chioma snorted. "Do you think I will let you travel with a man like Obinna Scott Okiki and look like fear itself?" Despite her nerves, Adaora laughed. Chioma held up a simple but elegant dress. "Wear this one when you land, or for dinner if they say you should dress up. And please, Adaora, if you are traveling with a billionaire, at least try not to. Look frightened." "I am frightened." "Yes, but do not wear it on your face." Adaora shook her head and sat on the bed. "Chioma, what if this goes badly?" Chioma's expression softened. She sat beside her. "Then it goes badly," she said simply, "and you come back." "But what if it goes well?" Adaora looked down. No one had asked her that before. Chioma touched her arm. "You did not force that man to notice you. You did not beg him for anything. He saw something. Let him see it." A few hours later, Adaora stood in the airport with 1 small suitcase in her hand and her heart beating too fast. Even the airport itself felt like too much. The crowd, the movement, the polished floors, the way people walked with purpose, dressed in clothes that looked expensive without trying too hard. Then she was led to a separate section, the VIP lounge, and the first thing she felt was that she had entered the wrong place. It was quiet there, too quiet. Thick chairs, soft lighting, cold drinks, glass tables, people speaking in low voices as if noise itself was poor behavior. Obinna was already there. He sat by the window in a dark jacket, calm as always, one hand holding his phone, the other resting on the arm of the chair. He looked up the moment she entered. For 1 second, Adaora became very aware of herself. The borrowed dress, the bag in her hand, the fact that everything around him always looked like it belonged, while she still felt borrowed too. He stood up. "You came." She almost laughed from the absurdity of it. "You told me to." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Good, you still know how to obey once in a while." That light teasing, so unexpected from him, eased something in her chest. A staff member approached to take her bag. Adaora almost refused out of habit before remembering where she was. Obinna noticed. "You can let people help you sometimes," he said. "I am learning." He looked at her for a second longer than usual. "The dress suits you." Her fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her handbag before she released it. "Chioma chose it." "I should thank Chioma." That earned him another small laugh. Not long after, they were led toward the aircraft. When Adaora understood it was not a normal plane, she stopped walking. Obinna looked back. "What is it?" She stared at the sleek private jet in front of them. "This is the plane." "No," he said with a straight face. "It is decoration." She turned to him in disbelief, then realized he was teasing again. A sound escaped her before she could stop it, half laugh, half helpless breath. Inside, everything felt unreal. Soft cream seats, space, real space. No pushing, no noise, no people struggling for overhead compartments, no crying children, no rushing. It did not even feel like a plane. It felt like a quiet room that just happened to move through the sky. Adaora sat carefully, almost afraid to lean back too hard. Obinna took the seat across from her and watched her with quiet amusement. "You look like you are waiting for someone to send you out." "I feel like they should." "No one is sending you out." A woman came to offer drinks and light food. Adaora thanked her so softly that the woman smiled. When they were alone again, Adaora looked around once more. "This kind of life is real for some people," she said before thinking. Obinna's eyes stayed on her. "Yes." She looked at him. "It is strange." "What part?" "All of it." He leaned back. "You will get used to it." She shook her head at once. "I do not think so." You already got used to telling a head chef that his breakfast tastes below standard. She covered her face for a moment. Please do not remind me. He smiled properly then, not the faint one that appeared and disappeared. A real smile that softened his face and made him look less distant. You were right, he said. They talked more during that flight than they ever had in the hotel. Not deeply at first, small things, food she liked, what she noticed first in a room, why she hated badly made tea, why he disliked people who used too many words to say nothing. It was not smooth all the time. Adaora still watched herself, still hesitated, still checked every sentence in her head before saying it. But somewhere between the food served on the flight and the quiet stretch of sky outside the window, something shifted. For the first time, Obinna did not feel only like her boss. He felt like a man she was beginning to know. By the time they arrived and got dressed for the evening dinner tied to the food event, Adaora's nerves had returned in full. The dining hall was beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel. Everything shone, crystal glasses, soft music, women in fitted gowns and elegant dresses, men in tailored suits who spoke with ease and carried themselves like the whole world had already agreed to make room for them. Adaora stood beside Obinna and felt plain in a way she had not felt since childhood. Obinna, meanwhile, moved through the room as if he had been born inside that kind of air. He greeted people by name, shook hands, smiled when needed, listened without looking impressed. Adaora followed quietly, trying not to hold her bag too tightly. Then one of the guests turned toward her. He was an older man with silver at his temples, an expensive watch on his wrist, and the calm confidence of someone used to being heard. He had been speaking with Obinna, but now studied Adaora with open curiosity. "So you are the young woman I have heard about," he said. Adaora blinked. "Sir?" The man smiled. "The one with the unusual palate." Her eyes moved briefly to Obinna, who looked completely unhelpful. The older man picked up a glass of wine from a passing tray and handed it to her. "Tell me," he said, "what do you think of this?" Adaora's heart jumped. People around them had already started watching. She wanted to refuse, to say she did not know enough, to escape before she embarrassed herself and proved every whispered insult right. But the glass was already in her hand. She raised it slowly, smelled it first, then took a small sip. The room stayed quiet. She closed her eyes for 1 second, not for drama, but to listen to what was happening on her tongue. Then she opened them. "It is young," she said carefully, "still fresh in the mouth, not old enough to become heavy. There is fruit in it, but not too much. And it stayed somewhere that did not hide it under wood for too long." The older man's brows rose. Adaora's confidence almost disappeared. She hurried on. "I may be wrong." "You are not." The answer came sharply enough to stop her. A few people reacted at once, not loudly, but surprise moved across the small circle around them. The man smiled at Obinna. "You were right." Obinna's expression did not change much, but Adaora saw it. That look in his eyes again, pleased, not surprised, as if he had expected exactly this. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, but something inside Adaora had changed. Not fully, not enough to erase all fear, but enough to make one dangerous thought rise slowly in her chest. Maybe she was not there by mistake. The next morning, she came down for breakfast before she was fully ready to face him. Obinna was already seated. Of course he was. He looked up as she approached. "You are improving." "In what?" "You did not try to run back to the airport in the night." She sat down across from him. "You would probably have sent security after me." "I would have considered it." That pulled a reluctant smile from her. Breakfast with him felt different now. Easier. Not easy, but easier. Adaora ordered tea and bread with eggs. Obinna had coffee and something light he barely seemed to notice while reading through a message on his phone. "You are smiling," he said after a while. She looked up. "Am I?" "Yes. I am surprised I survived last night." "You did more than survive." She lowered her gaze to her cup. "I still do not know how I got that wine right." "You listened." She frowned slightly. "That is what you do," he said. "You listen with your senses." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. It stayed with her even after they got into the car and headed for the event. The food conference itself felt like another world. Long tasting tables, Private presentations, chefs speaking about texture, heat, aging, preservation, balance, pairing. Plates so carefully arranged they looked almost too beautiful to touch. Adaora expected to feel lost again. Instead, the moment food entered her mouth, something in her settled. This part she understood, not the expensive clothes, not the language of money, not the quiet ranking of people in a room, but food. That, somehow, she could hear clearly. At one tasting table, she pointed out that a sauce was hiding the main ingredient instead of lifting it. At another, she noticed that a dish with beautiful presentation had no real finish in the mouth. With another, she suggested that one element had been added just to look clever, not because it belonged there. Ashef stared at her, first offended, then thoughtful. Obinna watched all of it. Not like a proud owner, not like a man showing off a discovery, like someone paying attention to a truth becoming clearer. By afternoon, Adaora no longer answered as timidly as she had the night before. She still chose her words carefully, but she no longer swallowed every opinion out of fear. And Obinna noticed that too. At one point, after a private tasting ended, he paused beside her in the hallway. "You are learning fast," he said. Adaora looked down. "Maybe I am, just guessing better." "No." She looked at him. His face was serious now. "This is not luck. You have talent, Adaora, real talent, and I am not going to let you waste it by pretending it is small." The words landed somewhere deep. For a second, the noise of the event around them faded. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with pity, not with empty encouragement. With certainty. She nodded once because she did not trust herself to speak. Later that day, she met Nena Obi. Nena was the kind of woman who entered a space and seemed to improve it by standing in it. Tall, elegant, beautiful in a polished way that looked expensive even before one noticed the quality of her dress or the calm shine of the jewelry at her ears. She approached Obinna with the ease of familiarity. "Obinna." "Nena." The way he said her name made it clear they knew each other well enough for there to be history, or at least comfort. Nena's gaze moved to Adaora. It was not openly rude. That would have been easier. It was the kind that smiled without warmth. Obinna turned slightly. "Adaora, this is Nena Obi." Nena gave a small nod. "I have heard about you." Adaora answered politely, though something in her had already tightened. Nena's eyes moved over her in one smooth sweep that took in everything without seeming to. "And how exactly are you working with Obinna?" she asked. The question sounded light. It was not. Adaora felt it at once. Before she could answer, Obinna spoke. "She is here because of her palate and her skill." Nena gave a soft smile. "How interesting." The words themselves were harmless. The meaning under them was not. Adaora stood very still. Nena tilted her head slightly toward Adaora. "You must find all this very new." It was the kind of sentence that could pass as simple conversation if anyone challenged it later. Adaora managed, "Yes." Nena's smile stayed in place. "I can imagine." Obinna's expression changed by only a fraction, but Adaora saw it. It was enough. "Nena," he said, calm but firm, "Adaora is here because she deserves to be." Nena looked at him then, and something passed quietly between them. Something old, familiar, complicated in a way Adaora could not read. When Nena finally moved on, Adaora released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Obinna looked at her. "Ignore her." Adaora nodded. But she could not, because the truth was simple. Nena belonged there. Nena did not need to explain herself in rooms like that. Nena and Obinna spoke the same social language without effort. And Adaora, no matter what she could taste, still felt like someone wearing borrowed confidence. That feeling grew worse later in the evening. She had stepped out onto a quieter part of the hotel corridor after one long dinner when she saw them. Nena and Obinna, standing a short distance away, speaking alone. Nothing improper, nothing dramatic. Just easy conversation between two people who clearly knew how to stand in the same world without discomfort. Nena said something. Obinna answered. She touched his arm lightly. He did not pull away. Adaora turned before either of them could notice her. Back in her room, she sat at the edge of the bed and stared at nothing. For the first time, she forced herself to name what had been growing inside her. This was no longer only about work, no longer only about shame, class, or fear of embarrassment. She cared what Obinna thought of her. She cared where she stood with him. She cared enough for the sight of him with another woman to leave a sharp ache in her chest. That realization unsettled her more than Nena herself. Late that night, after too much thinking and too little courage, she picked up her phone and sent him a message. "I think it is better if I go home. I do not belong in your world." The reply came almost at once. "Meet me at breakfast." The next morning she almost did not go. But she knew Obinna well enough already to understand that refusing him now would only make the situation worse. So she came downstairs with tired eyes and a restless heart. He was waiting. He did not begin with greetings. He looked at her once and said, "Sit." Adaora sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Obinna said, "This is about Nena." Adaora looked away. "No, Adaora." She pressed her lips together. He leaned back slightly. "You are not a good liar." That annoyed her enough to make honesty easier. "This is about everything," she said. He said nothing, so she continued. "I do not fit here. I do not talk like these people. I do not dress like them. I do not know how to move the way they move. Even when I do something right, I still feel like everybody is waiting for me to make one mistake." Her voice stayed quiet, but the truth in it was heavy. "I feel small here," she admitted. Small, unsophisticated, and out of place. Obinna's face grew still in a way she had begun to recognize. It meant she had reached the part of him that listened deeply. Then he spoke, more intensely than before. "You are more talented than many people in those rooms." Adaora shook her head at once. "That is not true." "It is." "No?" "Yes." The force of it stopped her. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I do not waste time on empty people," he said. "If I brought you here, it is because you deserve to be here." Her throat tightened. "Nena's opinion does not decide your value," he continued. "Neither does anybody else's. Comfort. You think belonging is about polish. It is not. Not in the places that actually matter." Adaora could not speak. He went on, his voice lower now, but no less firm. "You have a choice. If you truly want to leave, I will not drag you back. But if the only thing pushing you away is fear, then stop running and claim your place." The silence that followed felt long. Adaora looked down at the table, at her hands, at the untouched cup beside her, then back at him. He was giving her freedom, not begging her to stay, not soothing her with lies. Just standing there, clear and unshaken, leaving the choice in front of her, where she could not pretend it did not exist. Leave or stop running. Inside her, both instincts fought each other. The old one spoke first. "Go home. Go where things are small and familiar. Go where nobody can humiliate you in rooms full of polished strangers. Go where your fear makes sense." But another voice had grown louder these past few days, the one that remembered how the wine had tasted in her mouth, the one that remembered chefs pausing when she spoke, the one that remembered Obinna saying, with that unbending certainty, "You have talent." Slowly, Adaora lifted her eyes. "I do not want to leave," she said. Something quiet shifted in his expression, not relief exactly, approval perhaps. "Good," he said. She let out a breath. "But I am still afraid." Obinna's mouth softened just slightly. "You can be afraid, and still stay." It was such a simple sentence, yet it reached her. She had spent so much of her life believing courage meant the absence of fear. Now she sat across from a man who seemed to understand that sometimes courage was simply refusing to move backward. When they rose from the table and walked back toward the event later that morning, Adaora noticed something was different in her steps. The fear had not gone. Nena still existed. The room would still be full of people who could spot her uncertainty before she spoke. But something steadier had joined the fear now. She had chosen to remain. Not because anyone forced her, not because she had stopped doubting herself, but because for once she was trying to believe that what lived inside her might be stronger than the voices that wanted it small. And as she walked beside Obinna, not behind him, Adaora knew that whether or not the world welcomed her yet, she had taken the first real step toward welcoming herself there. When Adaora walked into the next event beside Obinna, the fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. Not long after they entered, she overheard two women behind her. "Please," one of them said, "we all know why girls like her end up around men like him." The other laughed softly. Adaora stopped, turned, and faced them. "Thank you," she said calmly. They looked confused. "For speaking about me with so much concern," she continued. "It must be painful to watch someone you think does not belong here and still fail to remove her." The women went quiet at once. Adaora held their gaze for one moment, then added, "You should focus on the event. It is about food, not bitterness." She walked away before either of them could recover. When she returned to the panel, her back was straighter. Obinna noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Adaora looked at him and said, "I finally understand why I am here." "And why is that?" "Because I am good at this." Something warm moved through his face. "Yes," he said, "you are." That confidence changed her. She no longer answered like someone begging not to be wrong. She spoke like someone who had finally accepted what she carried inside. Later that evening, at dinner, Nena Obi approached again. She was as polished as ever, beautiful, calm and sharp. "You seem more comfortable now," Nena said, her voice smooth with hidden insult. Adaora met her eyes. "I am learning." Nena gave a small smile. "This world can be hard on people who are not built for it." Before Obinna could speak, Adaora answered. "What truly bothers you?" she asked. "My presence, or the fact that I have not broken?" Nena's smile faded. Adaora went on, still calm. "Because you keep speaking as if I should have been destroyed by now." Obinna said nothing, but there was quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Nena looked from Adaora to him and understood what that silence meant. She left with dignity, but the message was clear. The fight was not over. After that, the room around Adaora changed. People no longer looked at her with mild curiosity. They looked at her like a threat. She had survived mockery, gained ground, and started proving herself in public. At a high-level event the next day, a respected food critic, Chief Cheek Maduka, approached. He was an older man with calm authority, and people stepped aside when he moved. "So you are Adaora," he said. "I have heard a great deal about you." He handed her a beautifully plated dish. "Tell me what you think." The room fell quiet. Adaora tasted it once, then again. "It is excellent," she said. A few faces relaxed. Then she added, "But it is also predictable. The technique is strong, the texture is right, but it is missing freshness. Not in the ingredients, in the thinking. It gives exactly what you expect and nothing more." Several people waited for her humiliation. Instead, Chief Cheek tasted the dish himself, nodded and said, "That is exactly the problem." The silence broke into surprise. For the first time, the people who looked down on her could not deny her. Obinna stepped closer and said quietly, "Now they know you are not pretending." Adaora had won something important that day. But that evening, a message came from an unknown number. "If you want to know the truth about Obinna, come alone." She forwarded it to him at once. His reply came quickly, "Do not go." She should have listened, but doubt had already entered her heart, and Nena had watered it too well. So Adaora went. Nena was waiting in a quiet lounge. She showed Adaora photos of herself and Obinna at what looked like intimate dinners and private events. Nothing improper, but enough to suggest closeness, history, comfort. "Men like Obinna do this," Nina said softly. "They notice a woman, bring her close for a while, then move on. You are not the first, you are only the most unusual." Adaora kept her face steady, though her chest tightened. "You should leave before he discards you," Nena added. Adaora stood. "If Obinna has something to say to me, I will hear it from him." She walked away with her dignity, but Nena's words followed her. Later, Obinna was waiting outside her room. "I told you not to go," he said. "I know." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why did you?" Adaora met his eyes and asked, "What am I to you?" The question changed his face. "If I wanted an easy woman in my life," he said quietly, "I would have chosen one." Adaora could not speak. "You challenge me. You unsettle me. You refuse me. You make me feel things I did not plan for." His voice dropped lower. "You are the woman who keeps breaking every rule I set for myself, and that frightens me more than anything." The honesty of it stunned her. There was no game in his voice, no polished charm, just truth. Adaora withdrew after that, not because she felt nothing, but because she felt too much. She was not used to being loved honestly. She had spent her life protecting herself from disappointment and abandonment. The next day, Obinna kept his distance, and she felt the loss of it immediately. Then Nena came again, trying one more time to get under her skin. But this time, Adaora saw her clearly, not as an untouchable woman from Obinna's world, but as someone afraid of losing power. "You keep waiting for me to bend," Adaora said. "That is your problem, not mine." She left Nena standing there. That night, Adaora went to find Obinna. He was alone on a quiet balcony. "You were right," she told him. "About what?" "About me always wanting to run." She drew a breath. "I have spent too much of my life leaving before I could be left, hiding before I could be hurt. But you," her voice softened, "you make me want to stay." He said nothing, only watched her. Adaora stepped closer. "I do not want to keep running from what I feel." That was all Obinna needed. He crossed the small distance between them and kissed her. It was the release of everything both of them had been holding back: fear, longing, relief, truth. That night they stopped lying to themselves and finally became a couple. The next morning, things turned ugly. A scandalous article appeared online and in print. It claimed Adaora had used a romantic relationship with Obinna to rise from housekeeping into privilege. It painted her as an opportunist and questioned her integrity. Adaora was deeply hurt. This was no longer ordinary gossip. It was a public attack. Obinna knew immediately that Nena was behind it. He did not hide. He called a press conference. In front of cameras and reporters, he said clearly, "Adaora Okafor was not elevated because of romance. She has real, undeniable talent. She earned her place. And since many of you are interested in my personal life, let me be plain. I chose to be with her, and I am not ashamed of it." Adaora stood there with tears burning in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw a man stand beside her without hesitation, fear, or apology. When the conference ended, she kissed him publicly. This time, she was no longer ashamed of where she came from. After that, they grew even stronger. Nena came one last time, pretending to offer wisdom instead of attack. "This world will always try to break outsiders," she told Adaora. Adaora no longer trembled before her. "Maybe, but I am not alone." Obinna stepped beside her and said, "She never was." That was the end of Nena. As the trip drew to a close, Adaora noticed a change. The same people who once dismissed her now greeted her with respect. Some even sought her opinion. At their final private dinner before returning home, Obinna asked, "What do you want when we go back?" Adaora looked at him and answered honestly, "I do not think I can go back to pretending I am only meant to clean rooms." "Good," he said, "because I do not want you beside me as a subordinate. I want you as my creative and culinary partner. I want us to build something new together." Adaora's eyes filled. "Yes," she said. That yes ended one life and began another. Back home, the change came fully. Adaora and Obinna worked together, and over time their partnership deepened. They developed new food and hospitality ideas, improved standards, and built something real. Adaora became known for her refined taste and natural gift in gastronomy. She was no longer the exhausted, invisible cleaner people ignored. She became respected. But what mattered most to her was not the title or the attention. It was that she and Obinna had built something true through work, trust, ambition, and love. Then one night, Obinna took her to an elegant seaside restaurant. He was quieter than usual. A violinist began to play. Obinna took her hand and said, "Do you remember the first time we met?" Adaora laughed softly through sudden nerves. "I was sleeping in your bathroom." He smiled, and from that moment, my life never remained the same. Then he knelt. He told her she had challenged him from the beginning, brought laughter and life back into him, made him see beyond work, status, and control, and that he did not want a future without her. Adaora was already crying by the time he asked her to marry him. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger, "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they kissed. 2 months later, they were married in a beautiful outdoor ceremony. As Adaora walked down the aisle, she thought of how far she had come. From exhaustion, invisibility, shame, and gossip into love, respect, and purpose. At the altar, Obinna waited for her with deep emotion in his eyes. They exchanged heartfelt vows and became husband and wife. Not long after the wedding, Adaora stared down at a pregnancy test in their bedroom. 2 lines. She sat down in shock. When Obinna came in, she showed it to him without a word. He looked confused for 1 second, then understood. His face changed completely. "We are having a baby?" he asked, almost like he could not believe it. Adaora nodded, laughing and crying at once. He knelt before her, cupped her face, and kissed her tenderly, his eyes full of emotion. And there, in that quiet room, they both understood the truth. Their story had not ended at marriage. It was only beginning again. This time, they were stepping into that beginning as a family.